Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Curse, and Purrs. I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the books I've read so far, and also the books that I'm going to try to finish by the end of the month of December. It really is flying by, and I've been fortunate enough to carve out time to read quite a few books, more than I plan to for December. Alright, so first off we have Jen Campbell. Please do not touch this exhibit. Jen Campbell is an author, a poet. She also, as far as her writing goes, she also writes children's books. She loves fairy tales, fables, and she also has a YouTube channel. Actually, she's one of the first like booktube channels I had ever seen, and she really has like this great cozy vibe that I really love. She also bakes, and she'll create segments where it's just her reading. Sometimes she'll go for a walk in the park and take us, the viewer, along with her, and so I really enjoyed that. I started watching her channel right around the pandemic, so I was all for watching someone walk to and through a park. Alright, so Jen Campbell is also a disabilities activist, and also has disabilities herself, and that is actually reflected in this poetry collection. She talks about her experiences of being a child in the hospital, talks about the care that she had. In a way, she's also talking about how she coped with it. In between at times, she'll have like these excerpts of what the doctors were saying was going on with her condition. And I think I already said it, but later on, towards the end, she talks about her IVF journey up until when she was going to publish this. I really enjoyed it. She has like a strong sense of voice, and on top of all that, as you know, I've said it over and over again, I say it every time I read a piece of poetry, that poetry isn't really my thing, but it's something that I do work on to read more because I have such an aversion to it, and I've had some really great experiences along the way of kind of starting to figure out what kind of poetry works for me and what doesn't. And so from her collection, I'm just going to read one of her segments. The pages 17, The Hospital is Not My House, and it's part 2. And it says, "The hospital is not a place for literature. The lights are out, and the young girl tiptoes to the edge of a tree, by which she means the edge of a bed, by which she means the edge of a corridor, where she is searching for the bathroom being the wet field that half hides the moon. Half asleep, the girl questions how she can hold the moon when she cannot hold anything, when she is grafted to herself and to this building, when her new skin slips, for she is wearing satin pajamas to stop the stitches catching. She is wearing satin pajamas to be a fish, and be her hips are now part of her hands, and the forest grips her feet. The trees have her, as the bedsheets flash the light from the sea to help her find her way back along the pebbled ward. She finds the moon for a moment, hovering gently above the sink, a giant rock pool, or a swollen mother, and she allows the current to pull her swiftly back to bed." So that is such a beautiful example of the kind of writing that Jen Campbell does. And so I definitely love this poetry collection. It's easy for someone like me to understand that's not really into poetry. And again, she is someone that toggles between the reality that exists and infusing it with fairy tales and fables. And that was like a really beautiful example of a child coping with something and also building another world for them, right, to cope. I just thought that was really beautiful. Alright, so I also read The Magic Fish by Trung Nguyen. This is a graphic novel. I think it's probably like made more for like middle grade ages. I really enjoyed this. It was a quick read. I zipped right through it. I mostly read it at this holiday function my daughter was attending, and I was just, while I was waiting for her to perform, I like started reading it, and then I could not continue to read it, and so I finished it quite quickly that night. And so what it is, it's about this young boy that is grappling with his sexual identity and figuring out how to come out to his mom. Layered with that is dealing, actually not necessarily, it's him, but mostly like the generation before, right? His parents dealing with maybe the trauma in a way, but their experiences as Vietnamese immigrants to America, so becoming Vietnamese American, and what they had to go through being refugees. And this is all told through glimpses, because the favorite pastime of the son and mother is to read books to each other. And so this young boy is reading his mother like fairy tales, and through that you get like a glimpse of what he's going through and a glimpse of what the mother is going through. And so for the mother, you just kind of see how hard the experience of departing Vietnam was emotionally. And for the son character, there's even like this fairy tale where there's this character in a way that like very subtly like gender bends, and I thought that was used in a really beautiful, like nuanced way. I mean, I loved it. I wish I could say more about this. The pictures in this are beautiful, and there's a lot of, I guess you could call it like color blocking, and that helps to break up what is happening in the fairy tale versus reality versus the past and present. And I just thought that these drawings are so simple in a way that lends to the reader interpreting the message that's trying to come across. And it was just, it's really, really good. So I really like this. Something that I had a little bit of a mixed experience with was The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa, and it's translated by Louise Hill, I think, Kawai. I always have a hit and miss experience with translated literature. I picked this up as a cozy read from Barnes & Noble. It was like on sale, so I grabbed it. And I did have a little bit of trouble getting into it, so I resorted to borrowing the audio version and reading along with the book with this. And I would say, before I even talk about what this is about, I really struggled with the slow pace, so the audiobook came in handy because the pace is so slow. I ended up putting the audiobook at 1.75 speed, and I never listened to an audiobook that fast at that speed. I usually at most go to 1.25 or 1.5 because 1.75 would be too fast usually, and I'm still trying to comprehend what is being said. So yeah, that's my only ding against this, was just a slow pace. I think once I got to the third section, there's like 4 or 5 sections in here. I'd say 5. I really got into it, so that's the downside as well. It took me a while to be invested in the story. Even though it's a cozy read, I just wasn't feeling very like engaged. But by the time I was done reading this, I'm so glad I read it. I loved it at the same time, with all the things that didn't work for me as far as a slow pacing. So this is about Rintaro, who's a teenager. His grandfather has passed away, and so he's at his grandpa's used bookstore. So this book deals with grief and loss. And as he spends time in the bookstore, maybe in a way to console himself with the loss of his grandpa, a cat comes along and says, I need your help. And it's to save books in all these different ways. So it kind of reminded me in a way, I can't really relate to it now, but maybe being a young kid and playing those like role-playing games where there's like levels to things and there's like a boss in a way and you have to defeat it. That was kind of like going through my mind as far as how the story was tackled. And what really grabbed my attention was there does at sometimes to be this like philosophical conversation about capitalism, consumerism, how books are marketed, art versus consumption. And that really reminded me of what goes on today. I only use YouTube and Instagram, but there's also TikTok that I'm not familiar with, but you know, I'm on very surface level aware of. And there's definitely been like this conversation about like, is TikTok changing the way books are sold? Which, yes, I think so, because even Barnes & Noble will have like a section of books and it'll be like a mountain of books and it says TikTok on the sign. So it's clearly like books that are being pushed through TikTok. And so, yeah, people need to make sales. I get that. But it also speaks to how in society there's an issue of like fast fashion. And so I think the same thing could be said for, I guess, TikTok creating like a fast consumption of material. It talks about like quality of books and who's the audience that you're catering to. There was just a lot going on in here, but again, it didn't kick in till I guess halfway into the book, and then I was really engaged. But it's also just a beautiful story about love and grief and coping with that and finding reasons to put one foot in front of the other. And so I really, really enjoyed this, minus a couple of things I had an issue with. I'm trying to think about where to go next. I'll tell you about Abbott. I just read Abbott last night. This is a comic book. This is just one volume. I'm not familiar with enough. I have another volume of Abbott, but I don't know how long this series continues. I don't know enough. Michael from Black Gay Comic Geek recommended this through Instagram. I'm sorry, my cats are acting crazy. And he always has really great recommendations, great curation, how do I say it? Great curation of comic book material and graphic novels. And so I picked this up and I absolutely loved it. This is graphic, and I've told you before there's another comic book that I had a little bit of an issue with, like how graphic the material was in terms of violence. It's a graphic novel, so of course it's inherently graphic. But this was in a way that didn't bother me because I felt like it led to the story. It's integral to the story, and I don't know, something about it just worked for me really well. And so Abbott is about Elena Abbott, who's a journalist in 1972, Detroit, Michigan. And so there's a lot of like racial divide that's very fervent. And there's also like the Black Panther movement that you don't see in this, but it's definitely referenced. So she is a female Black reporter that writes for a newspaper that is all white. So she's the only Black journalist. And so she does exactly what she should do as a journalist, which is tell the truth and report on that truth. She works different crime beats. And so she's already ruffled feathers by the time you start reading this book for writing about the excessive force and brutality that police use at their whim. And so she has different people, like someone in the, what do you call it? The police department that hooks her up with certain stories. Really early on you see how, although she does a great job and she's bringing in more consumers of the newspaper, she's also towing this line of getting pushback from her white bosses, the higher ups. So you definitely see that conflict. So that's kind of all swirling around this story. And then the main focus is the fact that she gets told about a crime. She gets tipped off because this cop just wants to make sure that the truth gets out rather than what's going to be told, which is lies. And she realizes that there's something about this crime that seems like familiar with for some reason. And there may just be this like supernatural quality to what's going on. And that's basically where we land. I'm sorry, my cats are... I have 2 cats and they're getting into it. It's getting wild in here. Alright everyone, I'm so sorry. My cats are acting crazy. And you can't see them, thank goodness, because it's just like National Geographic's. So I keep having to reset. I'm sorry. So there's going to be some weird cutaways. Alright, the last book I'm going to talk about that I've actually finished is A Christmas Truce by Emma Bennett. This was such an adorable read. Once I got to chapter 6, I hit a point where I couldn't put the book down and like sped through it. And like, so at the beginning I was kind of like reading this slowly. Also, I'm not big on romance, so that's part of the issue. But I absolutely adore this. So this is about Libby. She's a woman that's hasn't really found her footing professionally and has floated through temp job to temp job and just hasn't really found that thing that works for her. She really doesn't seem to be a good fit for like office jobs. And so her temp agency hooks her up with a job with an unorthodox position that works just for her because it's to be an assistant to a CEO, and it provides like a live-in situation, which is perfect because she also just broke up with her boyfriend. So there's just a lot going on between losing a job and then breaking up with her boyfriend, lands this job. And so it's a unique situation because it's like a personal assistant job, so it's something new that she's never done. And so she finds herself being in quite a bit of like friction with her boss. They're just not quite on the same page. And lo and behold, the holidays come around and she can't take off like she would like to because her boss is getting on her last nerve. So she ends up staying basically at her job, right? That has become her home for the holidays. So she has a Christmas truce with her boss. And I hope I'm doing this justice because it's so much better than what I'm saying. And so romance ensues. So to continue giving this book praise, I also wanted to talk about the things that I don't like in romance, or at least I thought I didn't like in romance that I thought worked really well in here. And I chalk it up all to how the author wrote this book. It's very clever. It's very witty. I found myself laughing, gasping, giggling. It was all good. All right. So something I noticed about maybe modern romances. Oh my god, my cat is chewing on my camera. What do you call it? Okay, we'll see how this goes. I'm trying to give you an example. I have not read Twilight, but I have seen the movie, and there are other, what do you call it? Fan-made iterations of that. I can't think of the word. Or other stories where there's, let's say, a rich man character, and then maybe like the low middle class, working class woman, and they fall in love, but there's always like a power dynamic in play that I don't like. And usually, okay, I'll say like with the Twilight, that's the only one example I have, I'm sorry. I haven't read a bunch of romances. But there's this idea where this person just falls in love with someone and they're like, oh, but there's all this money and I don't want it, but it's mine anyways because they were getting married. There's like this weird like loss of identity for that person as far as holding like their professional and financial independence. That's like on the undercurrent of it. And I feel like all those romances are a knockoff in a way of Jane Eyre. Like they're trying to do what Jane Eyre did, but missing the whole point of Jane Eyre. Because although Jane Eyre is this old classic, it says so much about the gender wage gap, like what has to happen to a woman and what has to happen to a man to be considered equal. And in Jane Eyre, like think about everything that happened to the other women that were in his orbit, because that's also equally important to Jane Eyre being with Mr. Rochester, right? And I feel like so many modern movies, I mean not movies, books miss the point, and it just really bothers me. That's part of why I'm not really into enemies to lovers, and I'm definitely not into that narrative where it's like a rich man and a woman that's not rich. I don't know how else to say that. This book has enemies to lovers, but I loved it so much. And I think the reason why I love it so much is we're reading the story from Libby's point of view, but even though I'm reading from her point of view, us as a reader see what the miscommunication is, and I feel like we get a sense of where her boss is coming from. And also, he's not a bad guy. That's the other thing I have a problem with enemies to lovers, is some of the enemies to lovers, the narratives that gets created, the plots that it ends up being like the person that the woman is falling in love with is just like not a good person. So I get very confused when the redeeming quality is only that the main character loves the guy. It's just, I think it's so bad and toxic. But that doesn't happen here. And so a lot of the friction, like I said, comes from them just not being on the same page, or maybe just not knowing each other well enough, and that they're very like two strong opinionated people. And if they actually just maybe communicated more, that they probably see that they're more alike than different. But I don't even know if that's an assessment I'm putting correctly, because they do communicate. I don't know. This just really worked for me. Another part of this is that, yes, Libby is working for her boss, and there's definitely like a potential romance when you're reading this, right? But what I like is that there's a lot of growth for her character. What she goes through is her finding out ways to like assert herself, get more in touch with herself, figure out what she wants for herself, professionally and personally, and whether romance happens or not, she does not lose her identity or who she is as she bridges towards a romance. And I really like that. I was like, it was so refreshing. I cannot tell you, I really mean this. It was so refreshing. Because if this particular trope wasn't handled just right, I would be rolling my eyes and would not enjoy it. So that's the best way I could put it. So if you don't like romance, I think you'll like this as a way to like dip into a well-crafted story. Yeah, there's just some very cheeky moments in here. I wanted to share something, but I don't really want to give anything away. And I will say one other thing as a compliment. Both characters do this thing where us as a reader know that Libby likes her boss. We get a sense that the boss likes her, but they're just not conscious of it. And I think that's a different approach that I haven't read before in a book. Usually a character will not know right away, like, oh, I just like this person. This was like a slow burn between chemistry and then like being conscious of that chemistry and those feelings. And so I really enjoyed how that unraveled. And I also enjoyed the character development. And lastly, because I keep forgetting, one more thing is, I don't like reading romances when people like each other, but we don't really understand why they like each other. And in this book, there's this conscious rationale that comes from them, Libby, let's say, learning who she is attracted to and why. We get, like, through her realizing that she likes her boss, we get a sense of why she does. And I appreciate that, because it's kind of annoying when a character likes someone and the only redeeming quality is that they like them. It's just, that doesn't work. And so, yeah, I love this. I'm going to stop talking because, you know, when I really like a book, I start going off on tangents. So here we go. All right. I'm going to talk about very briefly the rest of the books that I'm going to read for December. And I should be able to get through it pretty quickly. So Abbott, 1973, is a year after the other volume came out. That's when it takes place. So the other one took place in 1972, and this one's 1973. I'm going to read this today and blast through it. Then, I have not read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is a prequel to Legends and Lattes. And so I want to read this before the end of the year because everything else I'm going to be reading for next year is pretty dense. So this is my chance. This is like my one chance to get through this. So yeah. Another book that I don't have with me, I pre-ordered it. It's coming in just a couple of days, is Game On by Sarasia Glass. Sarasia Glass is the only other author I've read that's romance that I actually like. She wrote The Love Con, and The Love Con was so cute. The Love Con was a mesh of, what do you call it? Cosplay and competition and best friends to lovers. It was such an adorable story, but it also layered in talking about systemic racism and how this one contestant deals with all that, and even outside, just having to deal with like micro and macro aggressions. Somehow the author did it. It all worked. The tone worked. It was a delicious book. And I think that was the first romance that I liked from the beginning to end. So, yeah. So Game On comes out. I'll talk about it once I read it. But I'm really excited to read it. And I want to read it this month. Because again, next month I have so much dense reading to do that this is my chance to just kind of like shoo in some romance. And lastly this month, which I've already started, but I think I want to wait until I read all the other books I just talked about. The Davenports by Crystal Marquis. I started this. I listened to audio. I got a couple chapters in and I decided to stop because I just want to blast through all the other books that I'm reading, and this is a little more dense in terms of how thick it is and the material, and I just want to give it like my full attention in a way that I don't always do. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I really just want to carve out time to just read this and not multitask focusing on anything else. So I will definitely read this month. It's just gonna be probably like the last book that I finish. All right, so that's it for my book chat. Wish me luck. I'm gonna do my best not to add anything else, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. I'm so sorry for all the cutaways. This is just a odd timing with my cats. And I love you, and I'll talk to you later.